Ladies and gentlemen, up next we have our panel discussion.
I would now like to welcome broadcaster and international award-winning journalist and the moderator of today's panel discussion, Ms. Indivari Amuwatta.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here, excellencies, and our distinguished invitees. As I invite the panel, we have a set of eminent panelists joining us from the public and private sector. I'd like to first invite Treasury Secretary, Mr. S.R. Artigala, to join us here. Chairman of John Keells Holdings, Mr. Krishan Balendra. Chairman of the Board of Investment, Mr. Sanjay Mohotala. The founder chairman of Axis Engineering, Mr. Sumal Pereira. Thank you very much for being here. While the panel settles in, I'd like to open the floor for 3 questions to the President's Secretary, Dr. P.B. Jayasundera, before we begin the panel discussion. Do we have any questions? I think you've given a very good introduction and analysis of what is expected. Let me start off with Treasury Secretary. We'd like to talk to you about the key focus areas that you will look at going forward. We've seen many challenges from the Easter tax, COVID, and Dr. Jayasundera himself has been talking about what challenges we faced. But going forward, in order to take the road not taken, the Treasury Secretary is very important here, and your policies, key focus areas, if you may elaborate on.
Good morning. And first of all, I must thank Dr. Jayasundera for that excellent speech. I think my priorities, he mentioned those, because he mentioned my name about 10 or 15 times. That means those are the priorities. But taking from there, I think if you take the 2021 budget, it's all about inclusive growth. So that's the priority, right? So for that, from the fiscal side, we have in one side the tax structure that Dr. Jayasundera discussed. I'm happy to say that we managed somehow to gazette the enabling legislations. That is because the accountants had a problem for the 31st March companies, the financial accounts companies. Now I think they can use the reduced tax numbers. So from one side, we have the priority is the inclusive growth. For supporting part, the tax side, we have managed to do that. And also, if you take the 2021 budget, we have a public investment of 1 trillion. And as Dr. Jayasundera mentioned, it's more rural-centric, domestic value addition, and also domestically funded thing. That doesn't mean that it's not, we are not getting foreign support, but again, World Bank ADB funds, that will be less import content. So it will be stayed in Sri Lanka, right? So that's one area that I have to, my priority area would be that. Then also, there are non-monetary side also here. I think you are aware, one example is we are focusing on having a biotech park. It will be a private sector investment. It's a non-monetary from the government, but we are facilitating that thing. And I think in 2 months, we'll be signing an agreement where we will get the research and development side for this biotechnology in the South Asian region, which is a huge jump. And this park we'll be having in Homagama. That's also a priority, although it's non-monetary. That's one aspect. Then also on the investment side, The cabinet has entrusted us to fast track the investment. I think I am heading that committee with Sanjay is also a member, and key secretaries are there. That is, as you know, there are certain bottlenecks. Investors get frustrated. So our job is somehow to push these investments. So that's also a priority in my agenda.
We could get an idea about the private sector too. If I move on to talk to Mr. Balendran, heading Sri Lanka's largest listed conglomerate, what challenges for the private sector going ahead?
Right now, if you look at across our different businesses, the tourism side continues to be badly impacted, obviously, because of COVID. Some of the recent relaxations in the quarantine regulations will help to improve tourist arrivals, but it will take time. If you look at the Maldives, where they totally relaxed the regulations in July, it took a few months, and by December there was a significant pickup. So similarly here with the vaccines being rolled out worldwide with some delays and issues around new variants and a third wave that Dr. Jayasundera referred to, we expect that later in the year there should be a significant pickup in tourist arrivals. Of course, still less than what it would have been if not for COVID. And then going into 2022, there should be a return close to normalcy. The other businesses, the consumer side, recovered very quickly after the lockdowns were lifted in June. But again, we had an impact in November with the partial lockdowns. But we are now seeing business returning to normal since January. But in particular, actually, if you look at the supermarkets business in the last couple of weeks, you can see the confidence in the Western province, where our footfalls have returned very close to what it was pre-COVID. Again, it was a very difficult period with the lockdown for the supermarkets. Then as the lockdowns were lifted, we saw lower footfall but higher basket values because people were visiting less but shopping more on each visit. But now we are seeing that change where footfalls is again picking up. The property development side on the premium end still slow, and we think it will take some time for confidence to come back in that premium segment. But our other project, Trizen, I think primarily because of the higher liquidity and lower interest rates, we have seen very good sales in the last few months, actually even as good as pre-COVID. So that is encouraging. And the other businesses like insurance, banking are pretty much back to normal. Some disruption last year, but now back to normal. So going forward, if looking at our portfolio of businesses, what we really need to see is a quick recovery in tourism for the performance overall to get back to normal.
Moving on to the BOI chairman, I think global FDI stock is expected to reduce by about 40% during this year. But for Sri Lanka, what strategies do you have in order to make Sri Lanka more attractive as an investment destination? And I think investment's a priority area, just as Treasury Secretary and President's Secretary also elaborated.
Yeah, in theory, that I think if you look at global point of view, that is correct. But I think the countries that will provide the best investment opportunities will get the lion's share of that FDI pool. So I think as a country, when we look at it, there are several ways that we can be more attractive. Start with, let's see where we are starting. We are a country with $4,000 per GDP per capita. Let's not look at Singapore. Think about a country like Taiwan. That was what they were at 1986. We are a country at an inflection point where if we were to grow at 5 to 6%, we'll double our GDP in 10 years. We could have a much larger tailwind as a country that we didn't have in the history of our growth. So we are at an inflection point. Secondly, does this country provide attractive investment opportunities, short, medium, and the long-term point of view? Right. When a GDP doubles, your energy sectors, your infrastructure, your consumption will need to grow. Then we need to also usher in inclusive growth, as Dr. PB talked about and Treasury Secretary talked about. Right? There are sectors that will grow. Right? Pharmaceuticals. We need to have inclusive growth in terms of fisheries, agriculture, and those things with process value-added point of view, like what Merrill J has done with tea. We need to have many more. So there's a lot of opportunities in the short term and the medium term and the long term point of view. Just think about ICT. We're just scratching the surface. We're a $2 billion export country, give or take. India is 125 billion. We have one of the best intellectual capital. The companies who come here talks about and say like, oh my goodness, we didn't know about Sri Lanka. They came here for 500 head count. They are now talking about 8,000, 5,000, 8,000. So definitely, it's a market that provides opportunities. So definitely, we should be able to get a larger share of FDI. The second part of it is what Dr. PB also touched on. It's a supporting infrastructure. Whether it is the law reforms, whether it is taking the tax payments online, whether it is putting our customs process through an online process, those ease of doing business, right, debottlenecking these things will make it a more conducive environment to invest. Thirdly, as a country, as BOI, we need to be better at hunting. So I think Dr. PB, Secretary also talked about in terms of some of the changes we are trying to make in terms of going out, attracting, and bringing the companies in. I think then if I look at the audience, I think there's a larger role that I would expect from the private sector. One of the things that I hear more frequently is that the larger companies say that I don't have a dancing partner in Sri Lanka. So that means they want large companies to be part of their development and growth opportunities or their investments in Sri Lanka. So they want increasingly you all who are here to be a partner with them. And I think in that dialogue, I think we should engage more and find good marriages for those large companies to come in Sri Lanka and set up. And I think that's something that we really need to think about. And the last part I would say is to take advantage of FDI stock is to urge you all to look at beyond the horizon. Right? This is a good opportunity. We are bouncing back. We have a good tailwind. Think about building businesses next 5, 10 years. Not just the traditional businesses we are in. Put some risk capital. Get into new business verticals which will pay dividend. Right? There's a new whole, take an example. There's a graphene-based horizon technology that's coming in. How many of our companies who are leading companies here have taken charge in that? Just a case in point. So I think if you think those angles, to recap, the opportunities we process, the deregularization we are doing, better organization as BOI to be able to facilitate it, and the private sector part in building the world we want to live in or the country we want to live in. I think in that sense, we should be able to attract more FDI and we should not worry too much about the 40% decline.
Mr. Sumal Pereira, private sector participation here, I think you might have something to add. When Sri Lanka looks at going global, creating global Sri Lankans, do we have that environment now? From the private sector perspective, I think BOI chairman was also talking about the need for private sector to be more involved. But how do you respond to this?
I think we should get the private sector involved in our investment promotion. For example, we have some very good examples like Dialogue, Port City, China Merchant, and this logistics company, Michelin, and which was earlier called Lodestar. Now these companies must become part of our business promotion team, because the world out there like to hear from the country people, but they like to hear from respected multinationals who have made success stories here. Now, Dialog, for example, I know personally, is a huge success story. Port City hopefully will be one. And Port City is our diving board. That is our front runner if we are thinking of upscaling in a meaningful manner. Of course, whatever tax concessions and all are good, but perception is paramount, I think, don't misunderstand me, our media and our this, what do you call this, social media is letting us down, because that's what the world sees. You take all the newspapers, is there any good story? Any positive story? No. So that is a big drawback for us. We have to have positive stories in the face of people. Now if you now say today, what was most pleasant for me is when Dr. Jayasundera spoke about Mr. Merit Fernando, Mr. Schoolie Captain. They are positive vibes. Ashraf Umar, those are not in people's faces. What is in people's faces is some murder or some robbery, or it's all the bad news that is in people's faces. So how can you expect people to come and invest? So we have to change the perception of our country from a negative mindset to a positive mindset.
Talking about the change of perspective, I think my recent interview with Dr. Jayasundera, you've spoken a lot about from education to development. Again, involving the private sector here going forward, how would you create this environment?
It's two sides to this whole development. One is the government to create the right environment for educational opportunities for all the children in Sri Lanka. Private sector is to exploit the opportunities available within the country and develop it. In fact, without much such state facilities, private sector in this country should be given the due credit in entering to education and health in a much exemplary manner. If you take in the education sector, Gateway, Lyceum, these are schools that have now become even popular among outer Colombo districts. The children going to these schools are showing a better product and even comparable with international schools here or elsewhere. Then take the health sector. Navaloka, a hospital that came from an entrepreneur who had a vision that Sri Lanka can have a world-class hospital here. Then we have Durden's, we have Asiri Surgical, and Hospital Lanka. Now these hospitals have come without much support or enabling environment right for the private sector. Now, President Rajapaksa has realized this right balance is a must. Now, reforming education is a long-term one. Take our higher education, fundamental problem is we are recruiting 35,000 students about 12 to 15,000 enter medical engineering, law and such employable field, balance enter into liberal arts education. Now, these children, if our universities are beginning to think, at least start opening them for IT, healthcare, construction related skills, business, commerce, then most of them can be at least made employable. So that is one part of the reforms that is driving at the higher education level. It is not the intake that matters. What matters is how we create an employable, productive youth. Then the next category is the bigger one. Out of 300,000 students who pass A-level, and only 30,000 goes to universities, the balance is nowhere. Now this is the labor force where the skills could be developed into a much more employable level. We are talking, take port city or port and logistic related businesses. Where is the workforce for the port city? Are we to rely on Indian and Chinese and Nepalese workforce, or we develop our professionals, our youth, our youngsters to get ready for the port city activities? When the financial city is ready, where are the people? Now where are we engineers? Diversity, those skills. So that's why President has given the highest priority to skills education, where entire vocational education from 3-month courses to a much 2-year longer courses in IT, nursing, healthcare, construction related fields and several other things. And he has, as a change agent, has introduced what is called the city universities, which are not the universities regulated by the University Grant Commission, but more theme specialized agencies. And that's then come to the primary and secondary education, which is a long term. Now that reforms, there is part preschool education and the young children education, and then the high school education, and that is much more longer term. This is how we have sequence. After all, what we need to do is to get the right mindset in our population, among parents, among youths, as mentioned. Everybody needs this new mindset, positive thinking, because even the media, probably I won't blame the media, because that is what they have learned. So they communicate what they have learned. So we have to get a new fresh thinking, how nation grows. See, US, what is President Biden telling? Buy Americans. He create American sentiments in that country. What is Prime Minister Modi is telling? Buy Sri Lanka, be proud of buy Indians, be proud of India. What is President Xi Jinping telling? Think China as a new emerging world. So this smaller nation, though we geographically a small nation, all these three nations are looking at us. Why? Because we are important to them. Now that important is what you guys, business community, everybody should recognize, because we are not small. We are important country, and our country need to keep everybody looking at us. And that's what Sanjay Mottala was telling. Make everybody to look at us rather than everybody to reject us.
Treasury Secretary, moving on, I think on a different note, the rupee, there seems to be some challenges in managing rupee stability. But going forward, what have you got to tell us?
No, I think Dr. Jayasundera's BOP lesson in the morning articulated everything, right? So that's how we have to manage this. But in the short run, to manage the cash flows, we are discussing with foreign entities to support this stream. That is the cash flow thing. But in the long run, this is the path. I think the BOP lesson from starting from trade, he mentioned in the morning, that is the path, and that will stabilize the rupee. There's no other way to stabilize this thing, right?
Actually, I'm not looking that much long term. by May,
Yeah, not long.
not only rupee should be strengthened, we should be able to fix our foreign reserve management, and the exchange rate must come back to its right level. This artificial rate serve no purpose. Take, for example, total foreign debt that the Treasury Secretary has to honor, $57 billion. Every rupee depreciation is 57 billion rupees. Every 1 rupee is a 57 billion. So if we can get a much more decent, stable, stronger currency, he can give 57 billion to construction, that's free. He can give 57 billion rupees to BOI to do a total international campaign. He can give another 57 billion rupees to put the East Terminal. You see, this is how this country should look at, and here the guys who have to get the exchange rate. That's why I said at the very beginning, if each guy bring $1 million, today the accounts are far better than $1 million. How many people here? 150. So 150 million bringing $1 million each means $150 billion. Exchange rate should be 175. Very simple. So don't let down the country by thinking, because somebody should ask no fundamental question. Here we have importers. Here we have exporters. Here we have corporate leaders. Has the devaluation helped? Has it increased exports? Has it reduced imports? It's only compound the cost structure in the country. So that's why you need a right, realistic, stable currency, and it should not be long-term dream. Long-term, it should appreciate more. When China 10 years ago, 8 yuan per dollar, today 5. Why? That country consolidates its whole strategy. So that's how countries grow.
I think there are a few questions to the panel. We have the Maldivian High Commissioner with a question to Dr. Jayasundera.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Maldivian High Commissioner here in Sri Lanka. My question is to Dr. Jayasundera. Thank you for that very comprehensive and excellent speech. We learned a lot. I learned a lot. And you touched on restricting outward remittances. As you know, we have significant investments by Sri Lankan companies in the tourism sector. And I hear there's still a lot of opportunity for investments in Maldives. And Sri Lankan companies are having issues enhancing their investment portfolio in the Maldives because of the restriction in outward remittances. I just want to, BOI chairman also mentioned about the dance. Maldives and Sri Lanka have been dancing for quite a while, and we don't want the music to stop. What advice do you have for remittances, since it's mutually beneficial for both countries?
It's, again, we are not looking at a closed economy. This economy has to be open, well-regulated, well-managed economy. As you know, Maldives this time last year was asking $50 million loan from government of Sri Lanka. Prime Minister was pushing ST and myself, and I said, we don't have $50 million because we are also locked down. I said, we will offer $150 million credit line, suppliers credit. They can buy our products, whatever they want, and that was the journey. So each one tried to find their own solution. When we lost hopes, our key inflows like exports, remittance, tourism, and on top of that, we have to honor our external debt. So many, I would say, restrictions had to come in. So we managed 2020 in that environment. Now, vaccine has come. I'm quite optimistic by June, the country will be able to have a full vaccination in this country because Chinese vaccine also now being cleared. Then that will bring the confidence among the people. People have to come to work. Kishan was telling retail market is better than before. People are coming, but still not normal. So as we move, many of these things, now tourism, we have opened the airport. We are relaxing travel restriction. When the travel restriction is relaxed, not only we have the inward tourism, I'm sure half of these people have already booked going out. Medical tourism, health tourism, holidays, all are not here. Fortunately, because of the COVID, all were locked down here and went to a hospital. Otherwise, nobody would have gone to those hospitals. So now, world is getting reverse. When the reverse happen, I can assure you, we will have the most foreign-friendly business environment here. At that time, foreign outward investment remittance will also be part of our strategy.
Thank you very much. Do we have more questions from our guests? I think we have one. Yes, Mr. Aponso.
Good morning, sir. I listened to Dr. PB's speech. It was quite inspirational. I'm a teacher myself. But what I like to ask is, it's a formidable task ahead. And there's a lot of animosity going around from the media, from various other corners, to put us down. In the 1970s, when things were changed, it was done in a very autocratic way. It was bulldozed. But we don't have that space now. Under such circumstances, this is not a question, sir, but this is just an observation. How do you think we will be able to get to where we want to go to in this hostile environment, both from within and outside? Thank you, sir.
That's why I said our country is different. We don't have the East Asian long period serving government structure. We have democracy. One of the strengths in my speech also I mentioned is the democracy. That's the continuity. Even the European Union has to endorse, even in their human rights drama, they have to recognize Sri Lanka's democracy is something that they are proud of. Now, President himself has said, look, I seek a 5-year mandate. People have given me that mandate. I will deliver it. That's a democracy. But what is important is the continuity in what we are doing, and that's why he is trying to do as much as development which are unreversible. Government come and government go. It's a choice of the people. People may change or people may ask to continue. It depends. Regarding the hostility, as long as the tolerance is part of democracy, and they themselves will realize how should the country be together. Now, I am not worried about what the line that the media has taken, because I sympathize sometimes because they also lack the knowledge, objectivity, their professional role. This is not just a media challenge that we face, several other countries have it. But I think the private sector should speak. Now, I can't see why government only speak good stories. There are many success stories. Private sector should talk. I mean, if I have time, I can spend the whole morning telling 100 success stories here. These are not success stories elsewhere, here, and global success stories. And if I would have taken another one now if I mention all the names here, because every name is a success story. And that success story is a silent story. Make it a voice. Let's all of us get together. Why we talk the textbook PPP, private-public partnership. This is the public-private partnership. Government has a role, private sector has a role. Two have to be complementary. People must love the country. People must be proud of their destination, origin, free education, free health. Sometimes you don't value. Universities must value it, and universities must try to change it. Some do not like to change, and that's the problem. So I am not very disturbed about the hostilities, because I have managed much more hostile downturns in my career, and it is good when the going get tough get going. That's the growth story. That's the business story. And if I can share with anybody my public service career, let the tough get going. That's how it works.
While we are taking more questions, I'd like to also ask a few questions, private sector perspective. A former chairman of the Colombo Stock Exchange too, Mr. Balendran, we saw the stock market rapidly. We saw that gain and then a plunge. Did this represent the actual value of stocks? Again, talking about private sector participation, construction industry, we saw a lot of challenges going forward. But with such top corporate leaders, with so much of investment coming into the country also through these massive participation, how do you see the political authority, the public sector administration and private sector engagement going forward? What do we need here to put together to make that perfect balance?
I think on the question on the stock market, the market fell quite rapidly as it opened after the first lockdown. And then we saw gradual recovery, which reflected the recovery in business and also the lower interest rates and more liquidity in the market. But what happened in January was not really reflective of business value. I think the market got carried away and there was a lot of speculation. So the recent correction doesn't reflect a change in value as such, fundamental value. It was just that in January the market got overheated. So in terms of private sector and public sector collaboration, I think there is a very good engagement ongoing, and with attracting FDI will be key, as Dr. Jayasundera mentioned as well, and the private sector locally has a part to play. The foreign investors are looking for local partners. Case in point is the recent West Terminal announcement where we will partner a major regional investor. And as Mr. Sumal Pereira said, I think that local companies must play a role here together with some of the multinational success stories in Sri Lanka to promote the country. So there is a lot that the private sector can do to engage with the government to develop the economy.
Mr. Pereira?
Yeah, I think we must do more investment promotions together with the public sector than investing on our own, because finally, if you look at our Sri Lankan companies who have been real success stories, is the people who have found good partners from overseas, both in our industry or in the export industry. MAS, Ashraf, they have got good partners. That was, I think, the main success story. People who try to do on their own couldn't sustain it, and they, when the difficult times come, they crash. So I think collaboration and partnerships is the way to go for our country, because we can't depend only on the local market for most of our products, because local market, we are next to India, China, who are huge markets. So their market size is overpowering, But I think there's a lot of scope because of our good education structure. We yet have more well-educated and well-trained labor at the middle management, higher management category. But the unskilled workers and all, it will take time. We have to develop them by skill training.
For the closing remarks, we have a few minutes. BOI Chairman, again looking at Asian markets, how do we facilitate our private sector going out of the country, venturing into new markets?
That's a good question, Indivari. I think that's something that hasn't been the focus of BOI nor any other entity in Sri Lanka. If you take countries like Singapore, there was an institution called IE Singapore, many probably would know, where really pushed Singaporean companies to go global. Now, I think if you look at many of the conglomerates who are here and the large companies, I would say, look, you are in a country where you have a tailwind, you have a growth story, you're going to double the GDP, you'll have good balance sheets doing what you're doing. But then you also have set of countries around us who are growing rapidly with an opportune window which will close soon as well. Right? Take India, for example. Take Bangladesh, for example, a country who's been growing at 10-12% for the last 10-12 years. Yes, there are challenges in terms of investing into some of these countries, and that's what some of the bilateral dialogue that we are having to ease that, take out some of the challenges and the edge off so that you all can go and invest. Look at East Africa. Because there has to be risk, because we will be as economy another 5 years down the line. It's not the time to get up and say like, oh, I need to have international expansion. I mean, many of you all have expanded. Some of you have successfully are building. But what's that vision for large conglomerates to be established? For example, apparel sector has gone in and established in Ethiopia or Middle East, looking for arbitrages. But what I'm more talking about is, why don't we not set consumer goods presence? Why can't we build brands in these countries? Because that's the only way we as a country will punch above our weight. And it has to start now, because it's a good opportunity, a country we are going to give a tailwind, so you are secured. take a little bit of risk capital, do M&A, take a risk. Merger acquisitions are quite prevalent in this part of the world, and I don't have to preach to you all. And open that window. Some may succeed, some may not, but that experimentation will enrich you all, but also will create new markets. And that needs to happen. That needs to happen now, because you are in a good window. And 5 years down the line, those economies will grow with you, and you are in a good state when Sri Lanka is also in a good state. So I would encourage, and I think one of the things I was talking with Dr. PB as well, to take the look at BOI's mandate and help some of these countries to go abroad, because that's something that we need to start facilitating.
Finally, to Dr. Jayasundera and Mr. Article, we talk about the Port City Law, we talk about new policy framework, but in line with the existing policy framework, what new changes or announcements are you looking at for the country and the private sector?
I already announced the Port City Law. Tax laws have been gazetted. They will be placed before Parliament. And this kind of symposium, regular dialogue, probably will update the people what matters, because media doesn't talk, as Sumal mentioned, on the tax laws they may pick up. Now so many taxes have been written off. That's how they will pick up. So I rather prefer announcement come in a productive manner. You saw East Terminal drama. So in a way it's good, because we managed to have East and West Terminal both happen. So it's not bad. So similarly, opening, I'm sure if the John Keels have money, they have already in Maldives, and I'm sure they will do it. Bank of Ceylon is there. So these people will gradually build up. Prime Minister's recent visit to Bangladesh, a 200 million population market, most vibrant economy in South Asia right now, growing around 6-7%. Prime Minister spoke with them for a bilateral trade between Sri Lanka and India in a manner acceptable to both countries. We are a 21 million people population, but $4,000 per capita income country. Don't underestimate that. Whereas Bangladesh is still a $1,000 per capita income country. So 21 million versus that per capita income, and here. Same with only few countries today in the world are not growing. Every country is growing. As Sanjay said, each country has to find from where does it generate the growth. India is a big market, and yet Sri Lanka was the market for India. $750 million car imports came to Sri Lanka from India, and they were concerned when we restricted the import of motor vehicles. That is because big market. For New Zealand, Sri Lanka is a big market, among the top 7. So we are not a small market. So that's why we have to look at when turmeric was restricted. India was nervous because so much of request came to clear it. But that's how trade takes place. So everybody has to explore its own competitiveness and move on to it. We have asked China, now it's a big market, allow us to export to Chinese market. Our trade dialogue unfortunately did not go through after 2015. But from China, what we ask is, give us apparel, access your fabric, our product comes to you. Give us tea, he will send the tea. We can have the value addition and the market growth. And then gem, jewelry and products like that, spices, coir product, all these things are part of these discussions, and we have expressed, President has expressed his desire not to be too ambitious, not to become too global, but not to be unduly close. Find the blend, because countries have to find these markets, and that's where countries looking at. Singapore, learn the lessons. They don't have anything, but they have everything. So opportunities are there, and the business model have to be permitted to work with those environments, and I'm sure we have our own journey, and that's why I like the title, Road Not Taken. Because when all countries grow, and if you get nervous, you will never grow. So every country is growing, and South Asia, I'm glad World Bank is now predicting a more positive growth. IMF is predicting a more positive growth for the whole world. I saw a prediction that India will grow by 11% this year. Now, if India grows by 11%, at least 1% of that growth will be here. China is picking up. American economy is picking up. World is unlocking. So tourism is picking up. So the growth opportunities are there, and Sri Lanka has many advantage to enter this market in that manner, and I'm quite optimistic.
Do you have anything?
To add what Dr. Jayasundera mentioned, because you asked about announcement from the fiscal side or the private sector, what we can say is we will keep this tax structure for 5 years, right? That's you can plan your investments accordingly, because there will be no worrisome factors coming in from midnight or that type of things will not happen. So that announcement we can make, as he mentioned in his speech also, right?
Thank you very much. I request your presence as the organizers, the BiZnomics team, will have a felicitation of Sri Lanka's topmost public sector official, as well as a truly global Sri Lankan. Over to you all.
I cordially invite Dr. Kenneth De Silva, Director of BiZnomics Magazine and Managing Director of eConsult Asia and Advisory Services, to hand over the tokens of appreciation.
We would like to hand over the frame cover page of the first edition of BiZnomics for the year 2021, where Dr. P.B. Jayasundera was featured on the cover story.
Moving on to the panelists. To start off, Mr. S.R. Artigala, Mr. Krishan Balendra, Mr. Sanjay Mohatlal, Mr. Sumal Pereira, and the moderator of today's panel discussion, Ms. Indivari Amuwatha.
We would also like to call upon Dr. De Silva to hand over a frame of the last edition of the 2020 magazine, graced by Sri Lanka's topmost entrepreneur, a global Sri Lankan, a gentleman who has truly brought pride to our country, the founder of the global tea brand, Dilmah, Mr. Merrill J. Fernando.
Thank you, Dr. De Silva. On behalf of BiZnomics, we would like to thank all the sponsors, participants,